I'm Caroline Moderesi-Tirani. You're watching Huffpost Live. Another week, another murder of a secular voice in Bangladesh. Publisher Faisal Arifuddin Dipan was killed over the weekend. His death follows a gruesome pattern of murders, including his colleague and friend Avijit Roy, who was hacked to death by a mob back in February. Well, Roy's death was made waves in the media and got the attention of the international community, but the attacks on secular writers and activists in Bangladesh have not stopped. Well, joining me now to ask what's behind this surge of violence and what's being done to safeguard free speech in the country is Anishay Hussain, Bangladeshi journalist at anushaspoint.com, Michael Dodora, Public Policy Director for the Centre for Inquiry and President of the United Nations NGO Committee on Freedom of Religion or Belief, Nuruddin Ahmed, a Bangladeshi engineer, blogger and social entrepreneur, and Salil Tripathi, Chairman of PEN International's Writers in Prison Committee. So I want to thank you all very much for joining us. Anusha, I want to start with you. 5 people this year, 4 writers and a publisher have been murdered so far. Has anyone claimed responsibility yet for the killings?
Well, you know, there was a group that claimed responsibility for it, allegedly the Al-Qaeda division of the Indian subcontinent, that even issued a statement on Twitter. But you know what is so shocking about these killings is that in general, you know, freedom of speech is something that is revered and something that we need to protect. But it's very disturbing and troubling that it's happening in a country like Bangladesh that is so steeped in such a rich literary tradition and a love of language. And it's actually terrifying. Many people I know back home are in complete shock.
Yeah, and you know, Salil, talk to us a little bit about who of these people who have been targeted are. I mean, you know, are they particularly politically active or are they, you know, more sort of secular and not so much involved in politics?
Well, it's a bit of both. They are certainly secular and rationalist and in some cases atheists. In fact, the blog called Mukto Mona, which means the free mind, if you look at the content there, it's pretty much critical of all religions and fundamentalism within religions. So that's certainly part of it. But it's part of a longer and deeper story and narrative, which goes back to the Independence War of 1971, whose echoes are being reverberated today with the war crimes tribunals which are going on, where the people who are in the defendant's dock are some of those who probably did not want an independent Bangladesh, who probably wanted Bangladesh to still be part of Pakistan. And it's the other side, that one which obviously has socialist, secular and other credentials and has largely talked in terms of liberal politics. So these folks who have been targeted are on one hand certainly secular and liberal, but on the other hand, they are also fundamentalists in their core belief about liberalism, and they are insistent, at least some of them have been insistent for justice in the war crimes tribunals. And so the two narratives are coming together in a kind of a confluence, which is why it is becoming both explosive from a religious and political angle.
Yeah, and you know, Nuruddin, give us a little bit of the background as to, you know, what's been happening in the country in the last few years that would mean that actually holding some of these views would be as incendiary as they seem to be.
Yes, I mean, like Bangladeshi blogosphere has been existed since 2006, and Avijit Roy started his Mukto Mona since 2002, and you know, nothing sort of happened back then. But since 2013, like people have been attacked. Like it began with Asif Mohiuddin's attack in 2013's January. Then another blogger, Rajiv Haidar, was murdered in 2013's February, and then the government had to act a little bit because of the pressure, international pressure and bloggers' pressure. And then since this year, 2015, we are seeing, you know, these strings of violence against bloggers.
And, you know, you've got a website, and I've got it up here. We can see this timeline of the attacks that have happened just in Nearest alone. Avijit Roy, as we've mentioned, was killed. He was hacked to death after a book fair, and his wife was with him and also badly injured. And you can see, I mean, it reads a very, very devastating and tragic list of all these different people, all these bloggers that were killed in the country, and this has just happened, as we mentioned, this year alone. Anusha, talk to me a little bit about what it's like at the minute to be a journalist, to be a person who's a proponent of free speech in Bangladesh.
It's terrifying. And, you know, I don't even live there, but obviously my family is still there. I go back often, and it's terrifying. The religious extremist message is very clear. if you express yourself, if you say anything remotely against what they may be preaching, I mean, there's no room for tolerance or pluralism in what they envision for Bangladesh to be. So their message is very clear. They will kill you. They will butcher you in broad daylight. I was actually even considering maybe I should perhaps not always comment on this topic anymore, just because you're just making, in a land that is so steeped in literary traditions, today writers are targets. That is very clear. Writers, and now apparently publishers too.
So in terms of the punishment, you know, the people that have actually carried out these attacks, what's been done to them?
I don't think there's been anything done to them. I mean, so far the government really hasn't, you know, there's been a lot of criticism of the government's handling of the situation, but it's very clear that there are religious extremists operating in this country. Like I said earlier, you know, a division of Al-Qaeda allegedly is even claiming responsibility for the attack. They issued a statement on Twitter. But so far there's been really no clear strategy on what we're going to do to resolve this.
Yeah, I mean, Salil, in terms of who is actually being placed with the blame for these attacks, is it still disparate? I mean, is there consensus among the international community and the Bangladeshi government as to actually who's carrying out these attacks?
Well, no, because nobody knows, actually, to be honest, because they have arrested 3 people after the 4th killing of Niloy Neal. Around that time, I think they did arrest 3 people, including one British Bangladeshi man. But there are questions about whether they've got the right people. Yes, people are posting threats to the writers on their Facebook pages, on emails, through cell phones. And there was a story in the New York Times this morning, which some of you may have read, in which 2 or 3 writers or television personalities, including Nobonita Chaudhary, have gone off the air. They are not even speaking about what they are doing and taking different routes. In one case, it's the husband who's driving the academic to work and back every day because they wouldn't want to trust a driver that they don't know. So all those things are happening. So to respond to the earlier part of your question about what is the government doing, in fact, the disappointing and depressing part here is that rather than doing something to strengthen the thoughts of or strengthen the spirits of the writers, the veiled message coming from the government or its supporters is that the writers should maybe not speak things that can offend people. The Prime Minister's son some time ago had said that we can't appear to be siding with the atheists, although we believe in free speech. A couple of bloggers have said that when they went to the police seeking help, the police apparently told them, I think you should leave the country. So rather than protecting the speaker, it all becomes a question of protecting the faith or the sentiment or the perception of the faith and the sentiment, and in a way targeting the speaker rather than the people who should actually be, restrained from carrying out these acts.
Yeah, Michael, what do you think about that?
Well, first off, let me say it's a pleasure to be here. Many of the people that you were showing in some of the B-roll who are out protesting in the streets of Bangladesh right now, including book publishers, academics, students, secularists, but also religious minorities, are real heroes, I think. And you also have some real heroes on the line with you here today who are speaking out about this issue. It's obviously very sad what's happening in Bangladesh because the exact voices that the country needs to hear right now, the voices for secular principles, the voices for democracy, the voices for basic human rights, are the exact voices that are being silenced right now because of the fear that they could be the next ones to be attacked. And there are things that the government can do to address the situation. It's really a question of, is there the political will to address the situation? And a lot of this does go back, unfortunately, very far, but it also goes back to just political infighting between political parties in Bangladesh, and it's made it so that one party will kind of blame the other party rather than actually address any of the issues on the ground.
Well, Michael, you say, the political parties could do something. What could they do?
I think there are a number of things they could do. First, and this is probably the broadest suggestion that we would have as an organization, is that the government, the current ruling party and the government, the Awami League, should stop with its divisive remarks regarding religion. After the attack the other day, Sheikh Hasina, the prime minister, came out and kind of blamed it on the opposition party, saying that they're trying to create distress within the country. There have been a number of statements that the prime minister has made kind of blaming atheists and other religious minorities for riling up religious sentiments. These kinds of things are not productive. They're not constructive. They don't get us anywhere. In fact, they make the situation even worse. I think more constructively or more practically speaking, there have been a number of reports that police and detectives who are investigating these crimes simply don't have the resources they need to really investigate and root out the individuals who are either planning or responsible for these attacks. If that's true, and we've gotten some solid reports that there is a lack of resource at the police level, then the government should invest resources in perhaps even creating a special unit within the Dhaka Detectives Unit to investigate crimes against free expression. I think, more broadly, there are a number of different things that the government could do, because a lot of these problems are related to economic and social issues that have been present in Bangladesh for a while. But in the immediate, a lot of the language they're using and the lack of resources at the police level, I think, are creating even worse problems in the long run.
And you mentioned political will. Salil, I heard you agree there. Talk to us a little bit more about the lack of political will that you see.
Yeah, I think it's partly to do, again, and I don't want to bring everything back to 1971, but in a way, my Bangladeshi friends here would probably agree with this, that there is the whole idea about, what happened in the war at that time. And the Awami League was in power immediately, then it was out of power for a substantial period of time, and has come back trying to reclaim what the narrative was of 1971, and has taken a series of missteps and antagonized the opposition. So while it wants on one hand to assert its supremacy, at the same time it is conscious that there is a substantial chunk of the national vote which it cannot take for granted. Now it assumes...
But I think it's also really important. I mean, I know that the role of the government is really significant, but it's also important to remember that there's only so much the government can do. I mean, without setting off, religious sentiments are so high right now, and people are so sensitive. I mean, the government has to be really careful that they don't set up an all-out religious war, which is really what the extremists would want. I do agree with what you're saying about the echoes of 1971. Unfortunately, there are many parallels. I don't think we ever got the closure from the wounds of that war, which are very, very much alive. But you also have to see how it's kind of a systematic slaughtering of our intellectuals. Yet again, this is something that was a very clear war strategy in 71, and we're seeing it again with these attacks on these writers. Really young, vibrant voices are being silenced. Of course, the government has a responsibility, but the Dhaka Literary Festival is coming up. We have the Hay Festival every year. This year it's rebranded as the Dhaka Literary Festival, and people are terrified. My family and friends that I speak to back home are so terrified to even attend this event. So I think it's like, once again, the lines are being drawn in the sand, just like they were in 71. And I think ultimately it has to be the Bangladeshi people who have to once again reject extremism.
Yeah, Salil, what do you think? Do you think the history is repeating itself and the responsibility should be more on the people?
I agree with a lot that Anisha has just said, but just a couple of points which probably build on what she's saying. And that's what I was coming to, that Awami League should realize one thing, that the fundamentalist vote in Bangladesh has never exceeded 9 or 10%. Yes, the opposition gets 30 to 35%, but the fundamentalist vote within that has always been relatively small. That party alone...
Hang
on one second, Anusha. I just want to let Salil finish his point and I'll come back to you.
Finish. So you have that. So I think it can appeal to the good sense of the people. I mean, Bengalis, as you very rightly point out, it's a culture that reveres writers. It reveres education. It reveres the whole notion of, literature and so on. I mean, the Hay Festival the Dhaka Festival is certainly important, but think of Ekushe Boy Mela, which happens every February from as long as we can remember. And, it's one of the largest literature events in the world. And people do come to it and revere it. And it has to build on those uniting parts. And I think that leadership can come from the government. That's all I'm saying. I'm not saying that it's all the fault of the government and none of the other side, but I think it can take a lot of affirmative steps to make sure that people feel confident and safe.
Yeah, Anusha, talk us a little bit more about that and the point you were raising, and also the idea that if these attacks have been sort of these isolated, very targeted attacks against intellectuals that may be coming from Islamic extremists, in terms of how the people can self-determine and actually be able to rise up to protect themselves, how do you see that happening when there are certain governments that have been unable thus far to be able to protect the masses against this kind of isolated terrorism attack?
Well, you've seen people coming out on the streets. Bangladeshis, regular Bangladeshis, activists, advocates have all been organizing and protesting on the streets. But I think what's important to remember about extremists normally operating in Muslim countries is that they are generally minorities, but it's a very organized, extremely violent minority. I think people are scared, and I think their tactic to cultivate a culture of fear is very effective. Butchering your peers on the street, butchering people in your profession on the street is definitely sending a message to everybody else. So I feel like even though we can say so much about these extremists, yes, generally the majority of population doesn't support them, they are very violent. What can we do about this violence? They have no issue of using violence.
And Nuruddin, we sort of talked a little bit about government accountability. I just want to come back to that point. Your organisation looks at government transparency and also tries to hold the government accountable on certain issues. Do you think that the Bangladeshi government are failing at the moment in safeguarding individuals' rights and freedom of expression?
Of course, actually, the government is also, one of the villains in this at this stage, because the government has enacted a couple of laws which goes against the bloggers, including Article 57 actually, which can be used against bloggers and actually has been used against bloggers. They cannot arrest killers of the bloggers, of these intellectuals, but they have arrested people who have put up statuses against the prime minister. So yes, the government has been acting instead of siding with the bloggers, they have actually, sided with the fundamentalists actually. And another thing is this government in 2014, 14th election, this government won without any opposition. So actually it does not give this government, a mandate to, a legitimacy to work with the opposition party or other parties, even civil society members actually. The government has been pushing against civil society members. The major today is the government has ordered, the intelligence agencies have ordered different corporate organizations not to advertise on two major dailies. So, this government is not defending civil society members as well. And without civil society members, I don't think how you can fight extremists. You need to get the civil society members on board as well. So I think the government is not doing enough.
Yeah, and Michael, you're going back to that sort of lack of resources. I mean, do you see that there have been the appropriate level of resources actually put towards tackling this kind of extremism and seemingly isolated, although there's a pattern, of course, with these terrorist attacks against bloggers and secular writers in the country?
Well, just to jump off that last point, I think that's a really important one. The advocacy that's being done by organizations in Bangladesh or outside of Bangladesh, like my own organization, has been to pressure the government to respect civil society groups insofar as those civil society groups and individuals, activists, can speak out against the narrative that's being spread by the extremists in the country, which will lead to long-term change in Bangladesh. What has been sad to see is that there's not been enough resources dedicated at the government level and at the police level to either investigating the individuals who are responsible for crimes or for protecting individuals who are subjected to these attacks. And so there have been a number of individuals in Bangladesh, including a publisher and two bloggers who remain in the hospital right now, and their family members who have been subjected to attacks and have not, from what I gather from my sources in Bangladesh, receiving the kinds of protection they really need, given their particular situation right now, their emergency situation, to prevent any further attack from coming on them. So there needs to be a lot done at the level of the government and police work that's being done. And part of that will come if this issue continues to to grow in terms of awareness around the world, and you have foreign governments that begin to put pressure on the government of Bangladesh to protect civil society.
Yeah, I mean, Salil, talk to us a little bit about the lay of the land, because, we know that Bangladesh is a Muslim-majority country. These attacks have been predominantly against secularist writers. There are, several groups that their names have been affiliated with some of these attacks. So we have Ansar al-Islam, which is the Bangladeshi division, or wing, if you will, of Al-Qaeda. And then you have Ansarullah Bangladesh. Talk to us a little bit about those groups.
Well, I mean, those groups are shadowy. There's relatively very little information available about them except for the announcement they post. And I have not researched that part of the narrative, so I can't really say whether they did it or not. But certainly they need, any responsible government should be keeping a watch on them. But to build on the point just made earlier, I mean, one of the problems is indeed that, I think Nuruddin made the point, that the government has also been cracking down, not only on some of the people who are criticizing the Prime Minister, but also some of the people who have blogged and critically of the religion. So some of these atheist bloggers, some of them are facing charges under Section 57 of the Information Act in Bangladesh. So you do have a situation where a journalist faces or a blogger faces a threat on one hand from the machete and on the other hand from the magistrate. And this is, it's in a way he's in a double bind, and which goes back to the point of the key difference between 1971 and today is that in 1971 you had a situation where the state, which was the Pakistan government actually, and its agents, which were called Razakars, they were going after the intellectuals and killing them. Today, the killing is actually done by non-state actors, and the state is actually supposed to be on the side of the victims and protect their rights, but it is absent, and it again goes back to the political will question.
Yeah, Nuruddin, I mean, elaborate a little bit more on what Salil just said, and specifically, if you can, to those two organizations that I mentioned.
Yeah, actually, on media, we are seeing this information, and I guess all we know about them is from some of their tweets. That's it. I mean, police have said that some of those terrorists were inspired by Anwar al-Awlaki, who has been, a member of Al-Qaeda. So that's all we know actually about them. So we don't know much about them. And recently there has been some attacks on foreigners. Two foreigners were killed in Bangladesh, and ISIS has claimed that they have killed those foreigners, and the government sort of rejected that claim. So we don't know actually what's the reality. The government on one side is rejecting, but I agree with Salil that yes, the government needs to keep an eye on that and needs to act now actually. So we don't have much information on that, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, Anusha, I mean, let's talk a little bit more about what the international community can do here, because obviously, we've been talking a lot about the Bangladeshi government, but, here we are, we've all got these resources, to put more of an awareness on this issue. What would you like to see from the likes of the US government?
I would like to see more solidarity, and just the fact that people are watching the story, they're watching the developments, and that they care. There was a huge protest in the UK earlier this week with Salman Rushdie, Margaret Atwood. I feel like writers and thinkers across the board and across the world really need to unite, because if we allow Bangladesh to slip to religious extremism, to become, it's one of the world's rarest and few Muslim democracies, and if we let it to religious extremism and fundamentalism, those same actors will use this tactic in other countries, where they will intimidate and use violence to silence people and to silence minds. So I would like to see more of the kind of solidarity we've been seeing around the world, and just if everybody can get together and say, we will not tolerate it, we will not be silenced.
Well, I want to thank you all very much. Yeah, go for it, actually, Sil, yeah.
Just a very quick suggestion of a very practical thing that the governments in the West can do, which is to give visas to the Bangladeshi bloggers who want to leave because of a well-founded fear of safety and fear that they are being persecuted. It's very hard for Bangladeshi nationals to get visas, but if they are facing this kind of danger, then they should meet all the criteria for what we consider refugees, and they should be able to have safe passage out.
Interesting. Very quickly, Michael, just follow up on that in terms of visas and what the US government should and shouldn't be doing. Do you think that the US government has been failing at the moment to safeguard these Bangladeshi writers who would qualify as refugees?
Well, it's a very difficult and complicated situation that we're dealing with in Bangladesh, and I've had a fair amount of contact with the U.S. government, and I've been pleased with the work that they're doing on this issue. A lot of it has to happen off headline and out of the news, understandably, because you're dealing with a delicate situation, but they've been working very hard on solutions for both individuals to get out of the country and in terms of long-term support for human rights in Bangladesh. But, if I could just add 2 points on this note, there are some things, rather easy things that people in America could do to help in this situation outside of kind of, growing awareness of the issue. One would be there are a number of organizations, NGOs, civil society groups, such as the Center for Inquiry and International, which are helping to raise funds to move some of the individuals who are threatened in Bangladesh. And so finding out those funds after this segment can make a big difference. The other is pick up the phone. If you're in America or really wherever you are, pick up the phone, call your government official, say, I heard about what's going on in Bangladesh, and I want you to be concerned about this, and I want you to engage on the issue.
I think it's a great point, Michael.
I think it can go a long way toward, again, creating more awareness and pressure on the government to stand up for human rights.
Well, guys, I want to thank you all very much for joining us today. Anushe, Michael, Nuruddin and Salil. And guys, of course, we will be following this story as it develops. You can check out more about what's going on in Bangladesh. Links are in the resource well below, as are links to all of our guest work. And stick around, much more HuffPost Live coming up next.